Welcome everyone to this morning's Family Caregiver webinar on the topic of recognizing and reporting elder abuse. My name is Carrie McClellan. I'm the Outreach Manager for ElderHelp, and I will be facilitating today's webinar and introducing our speaker, Jonathan Tagg, in just a few moments from Aging and Independent Services. Before I do that, I just want to share a little bit about ElderHelp so that you are familiar with our organization. So our mission at ElderHelp is to support older adults and their desire to age in place with independence and to continue living with dignity in their own homes for as long as possible. We are celebrating 50 years of supporting seniors in the San Diego community, and along with seniors directly, we've also supported family members throughout that time. We have a set of core services that we offer to support older adults and their independence to continue living at home as successfully as possible and having a good quality of life. We offer information and referrals, so connecting people with resources, whether it's through ElderHelp's programs directly or through other community resources. We offer check-in call programs. One in particular is called Are You OK? That's really helpful for individuals who might live alone and not have many people checking in on them on a regular basis. We can check in and make sure that they're doing all right by making those routine phone calls. We offer transportation services through our volunteer driving program called Seniors A Go-Go. We offer in-home support through our care coordination program that has degreed social workers who assess our clients' needs and connect to resources, as well as volunteer services to help with grocery shopping and home office help, minor home repairs, and those types of services. We offer a variety of nutrition services in addition to grocery shopping. We also have a pantry service that we deliver food to individuals who can benefit from those supplies as well. And through our housing services team, we help to maintain stable housing and prevent homelessness. So we offer a home share program where we facilitate a match between a home provider, somebody who has a spare room in their home, and a home seeker, somebody who might be looking for a room to move into, who may pay rent to be there or provide services in exchange for staying in the room, or a combination of the two. So all of our services are geared around helping older adults continue to live independently at home. And I want to share about our family caregiver support program. That's where this webinar is being hosted through. Our wanting to reach family members who might be caring for aging loved ones at any point of the journey. Maybe they are just worrying about their aging loved ones or noticing changes and wanting to find out what resources are available. So we offer webinars on a variety of topics, including today's, and we also have online courses that we've created that I encourage anybody to check out on our website that might want to know more about those. They help with putting together a care team or trying to plan ahead for changes that might come along the way. And we partner with Alzheimer's San Diego and Southern Caregiver Resource Center to collectively support more family caregivers in our county and beyond. And today's webinar topic, I'm really happy to be able to bring to all of you. I know that in the audience, we have senior service providers, we have ElderHelp staff, we have volunteers, we have community members, and this topic is really relevant for so many of us. As we are supporting older adults professionally or personally, it's important to be able to recognize those signs that somebody might be experiencing elder abuse. And so I look forward to sharing more about all of those different risks and how to report that concern if you do have a suspected elder abuse situation in your life. So before I go on, I am going to introduce our speaker for today, who has the expertise that will be sharing all of this with us. So Jonathan Tagg is an outreach and education specialist at Aging and Independent Services, a division of County of San Diego Health and Human Services Agency. With over 15 years of professional experience working with, advocating for, and learning from older adults, He has a diverse background in program and volunteer management, including affordable housing, home care, isolated older adults, and LGBT plus aging. And I have the opportunity to work with Jonathan with a couple of different community collaborative groups, and it's always a pleasure. And he just has a wealth of knowledge that I look forward to sharing with all of you today. So welcome, Jonathan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Carrie and ElderHelp.
Our pleasure. I'm going to give you the controls so that you can advance the slides in just a moment. And I should mention that if anybody has questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in. You can use the question pane to do that, and we'll go through those at the end of Jonathan's presentation, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you.
Awesome. We good to go?
Yes.
All right. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's very important topic. This is great information for community members, family care partners, professionals. Really, it takes all of us and to advocate for elders and dependent adults. And abuse, as you will learn in this presentation, is probably a little bit more prevalent than you may have thought. So again, my name is Jonathan Tagg. I'm an outreach and education specialist with Aging and Independent Services. And we will go ahead and get started with this presentation. Oh, all right. Sorry. All right. So the best thing to start with is how to reach us. I will also end with this slide, but to call, if you ever need to report abuse, you can call our AIS call center, and it's also a 24-hour hotline to report abuse. So that phone number is 1-800-339-4661. I highly encourage people to put this phone number in your cell phone, your work cell phone, your personal cell phone, because you never know when you might need it. And it's not just to report abuse. It is also, as I mentioned, our call center at Aging Independent Services. So it's a great way if someone needs some information or referrals, or just has a general question navigating aging or a disability, you could call that phone number as well. It's open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 for general calls, and again, 24/7 for that APS hotline. So I'm going to be using some definitions today, using the word elder a lot and the word dependent adult. So these are the definitions defined by the state of California. So when I mention elder, I'm talking about any person who is 60 or older. And if I'm mentioning a dependent adult, this is any person between the ages of 18 to 59 who's living with a disability or another condition that restricts their ability to carry out their normal activities of daily living. So they're really dependent on someone else. I'm also going to be using the word mandated reporter or permissive reporter a lot during this presentation. So to define that, many of you may be considered a mandated reporter. This is any person who assumes the full or intermittent responsibility for care or custody of an elder or a dependent adult with or without compensation. So this would be our service providers, medical professionals. An easier way to think of it is just anybody who's working directly with this population in the state of California is considered a mandated reporter. You are mandated if you have a concern or suspect abuse that you report it. And then there are permissive reporters. This is any person who suspects elder abuse or dependent adult abuse and can report it anonymously. So these are our community members, our concerned neighbors, it can be family members, the grocery store clerk that may see something that seems suspicious. These are our permissive reporters. So between everyone in the audience, you're one or the other. And if you need some clarification, we can answer that after the presentation. But again, all reports are held confidentially when they go and visit the suspected person that might be abused. So no matter if you are mandated or permissive, that always remains confidential. Now, how to make a report before we start talking about the different types of abuse. It's you can either call the 1-800 number that I had mentioned before, 1-800-339-4661, and again 24/7. So that is probably the preferred way that most people just to call and make that report. If you are a permissive reporter, you just have to give the information. If you're a mandated reporter, you do need to follow up with more details and what we call a SOCH 341, and you could fax that, email that. And then our second option, this is more for our service providers that are in the audience. You can also sign up at our AISwebreferral.org, and this is how you can make that report and do it online. You also, through this portal, you can make a referral to in-home supportive services or some of our case management services here at AIS as well. So there are two different ways. What to include in the report is important. You want to give as much information as possible. Of course, the basics of, you know, who they are, their address, the phone number, anything that you can provide in terms of that would be great. If you notice any injuries, if there were any other additional risk factors that you have noticed or witnessed, any relevant medical information or legal information. So if you know the person maybe has dementia, you would want to include that because we have a special team, a specialized trained team that would be assigned the case if so. Or if you even suspect it, you should mention that. Legal information would be maybe if you know there is family involved or a power of attorney. That's a good information for the the APS workers to have. Anything that you know about the suspected abuser, the relationship, anything you can provide would be great in those details. And then if there's any way of helping the worker when they go out, which we'll talk a little bit more about that process here in a little bit, you would want to give, is there a gate code to get in? Should I be, here's maybe the best time to go, anything that would be helpful. And why all this is so important is because the APS report is what is given when the case is assigned to the worker. So as much information as possible to be helpful to the worker assigned is why these details are so important. They will reach out. They often reach out to the person who made the report just to say they have the case. They really cannot discuss the case or give any details. All they really can say is tell you who they are and that they have received the information and the investigation is beginning. And then if you have any other details, you can always tell them, but they really cannot disclose anything beyond that. So a little bit more about Adult Protective Services. Their main role is to investigate the reports of suspected and elder and dependent adult abuse and all the different types of abuses that we'll be talking about later today. They have 10 days to respond. All the cases are triaged, so if there's something that needs to be addressed immediately, it will be moved to the front. And if there is something that could is not as immediate, then again, they have 10 days to respond. So that's generally how that works. It is not an emergency response service though, so that's important. If there's an emergency involved, then it's best to get probably the law enforcement involved. APS would probably want to be your second or third call if it's an emergency situation. They do make unannounced visits, so that's why it's so important. And I mentioned before about including in the report anything that would be helpful for those unannounced visits. So if there's a good time of day to go, that would be helpful. They do the unannounced visits so people are in their natural environment, natural routines. If they knew APS was coming, then they could maybe prepare, or if there was a suspected abuser in the home, they might have time to, we really just want to see how people are in their natural environment. So the unannounced visits can be a little bit scary, I understand that, but at the same time, it's really to make sure that people don't have time to plan or prepare for the visit on purpose so they can see them in their natural environment. This is also voluntary participation. So just because a case was open and they come, if there is any suspected, if there was a crime or depending on what the details were shared, they might be able to get law enforcement involved if the person is not letting them into the home. But through this entire process of APS, even the referrals that are given, it is all voluntary. So keep that in mind as we talk today. The client is interviewed privately. So if there are other people in the house, especially if the abuser's in the house, they are going to speak with them privately to really make sure that they are able to create that open space, welcoming, open, safe space to talk freely. There is also a safety assessment, so they will do, a look around the house. They're going to look for other risk and vulnerabilities around the house. So they really are not just focused on the case or what's being presented to them. They're really going to look at everything. They're even going to maybe interview other people in the house as well. And the goal is to be able to provide information, education, and resources and referrals to keep the individual, safe in the home moving forward. So that's really the ultimate goal. So whatever they can do. Sometimes these visits are ongoing. They're not just a one-stop visit. So it really is about that participation. So sometimes if a client, in fact, maybe they need groceries or need transportation, then maybe the worker will be able to get more involved, help them with those things. So it really is a two-way street when it comes to adult protective services. The benefits of reporting to APS is there are specialized units. We do have a specific team called the ART team that will respond. That's Alzheimer's response team. So anybody who is either diagnosed with dementia or you suspect that they might have dementia, definitely mention that in the report or the phone call so they can, assign that case. We also have a few other specialized units like Home Safe. So if someone is facing eviction or being displaced from their home, they will respond to that. Or if the person is unhoused, unsheltered, there also is a response team for that as well. There's also a financial one, which we'll talk a little bit about later. There can be direct connections for food and good and direct services if needed. So that sometimes that is what the person might need is some groceries, maybe other items to be safe in the home. So they are able to help with that. If there are care partners in the home, they can provide support. So they're not just looking at that individual, but the whole home. Does the care partners need help, support? They're going to be looking at that as well. There's also could be consultations of getting other either medical or law enforcement involved or PERT or mental health resources. So they might reach out to other services to help them. And it's really about advocating for the clients. So sometimes the workers might even attend going, if they need to go to court with them, collaborating with other services to really just make sure, again, the goal is to make sure that they can stay safe at home for as long as possible. And then they might do that through cross-reporting. So if there's children involved, they might call Child Protective Services. If there's animals involved, they might call Animal Services. So really working together to make sure that not just the individual is safe, but making sure it's a safe environment for everyone. So under the California law, Penal Code 368 is what classifies elder and dependent adult abuse a crime. So this is what makes it very serious and very real for a lot of people, and it can be punishable by law depending on what the you know, if there is a conviction, if it does go to court. It doesn't always lead to that. Sometimes it's really about just providing some resources and some referrals, but sometimes there is an actual there could be, it needs to go to court. The DA's office might be, you know, involved. The FBI might be involved. So it could, depending on, again, the actual crime that's being happening, there could, if there's theft or embezzlement, it could be, you know, being sentenced a certain amount of time. Before I go into the different types of abuse, I think it's important that we just take a couple minutes to talk about dementia and their increased risk of abuse for people living with dementia. They're definitely a more vulnerable population, and about a third of the calls that we receive at APS involve someone living with dementia. So here are some of the reasons why. So actually, before I go into the reasons, for those, just to be very clear, when I'm using the word dementia, I'm using it as an umbrella term to describe the symptoms that interfere with the daily activities. They often include difficulty with communication, reasoning skills, memory loss, and maybe changes in behaviors. So Alzheimer's is what we hear about the most. It does account for about 70, up to about 70% of the cases with people living with dementia, but there's also other types of dementia as well. So this is really, again, more of the broadly, but if someone has difficulty with communication, this might be harder for them to express they need help or give consent. And so it's really important to understand that, and that's why we have a specialized team that will respond to these cases. They also might be more likely to fall for scams or fraud due to a decline in their reasoning skills or inviting someone into their home that they don't know. So we have to keep that in mind. And then memory loss can lead to self-neglect. If they're forgetting to take care of themselves in terms of grooming, eating, drinking, leaving something like a stove on, or misusing their medications. And then behaviors. Sometimes dementia can cause, you know, behavior changes, and this could lead to, you know, abuse in different ways. So we want to make sure that we're keeping all this in mind for people who are living with dementia. So if you know someone with dementia, that you just know that they're a little bit more vulnerable to the different types that I'm about to discuss next. So there are 8 different types of abuses that are investigated by APS. There's financial, which is the most common that we see here in San Diego County. And then there's mental suffering, physical abuse, neglect, self-neglect, abandonment, abduction, and isolation. All of these are under the Penal Code 368, except for self-neglect, which it's still very important that we talk about self-neglect because there's a lot of risks that come with that. So we will talk about that. But in terms of the Penal Code 368, that's the one that it does not cover. So I'm going to start with financial abuse. This is when someone is either taking property, assets, money from an elder or dependent adult. So this might be theft, it could be forgery, fraud, identity theft. And these are certain things that you would want to look for or listen for. If you're noticing that there's unusual banking activity, that could look like going to the bank more often, excessive use at the ATM, taking more cash out on a regular basis, having someone with them is an alert for the banks who are considered mandated reporters. So if they're noticing changes in banks or someone coming in on their behalf or with them always and they're not listed on the account, it could be a red flag for the bank, which they might make a report. Changes in their spending habits, especially if it's affecting them being able to pay for their necessities. If there's changes in wills or other legal documents, this could be a red flag, especially if you're giving or, like designating someone that's new in someone's life or a caregiver or a new boyfriend or girlfriend, that could again send some red flags. Unpaid bills could also be an indicator for the fact maybe they're using their money for other things, or maybe they're giving their money to someone who's saying they're paying their bills and they're not. The next thing is gift cards. This is really big throughout the United States and for all ages, not just for older adults. But scammers out there often will ask for gift cards instead of cash or credit card information because it's less traceable. So if you notice someone's buying lots of gift cards and they really don't have a reason for it, that could be a concern. Being on the phone and talking to people that they don't really know that well, or just seems like they're always on the phone talking to someone and you ask and it's not a friend, it's not a doctor, it's, if they're giving you a story that really doesn't make sense, that could be a sign. And really not having access to their money, their checkbook, their cash, that could also be financial abuse because it could indicate that a family member or a care partner is not allowing them to do that. And if they're not able to do what they would like to do with their own money, then that could be an issue as well. And then lastly, I want to just mention that when there's someone new in someone's life, we have to be extra cautious, especially there's romance scams out there. So if they're talking about a new love interest, we want to make sure that that everything is going okay, but also to make sure that they're not scamming or doing any type of fraud. So we really just want to make sure when there's a new person in someone's life or a care partner who's now in their life, but they're not through an agency, they're not being paid, but they're there all the time, it might be a little suspicious. So these are all things that you would want to consider if someone could be potentially being abused financially. There's also mental suffering. I think this is probably not what most people would think of as a type of abuse, but it's actually one of the most common abuses that we will see. And this is intimidating behavior, threats, harassment, deceptive acts that really leads to that emotional distress, fear, confusion, agitation. It really can make things very difficult for the end of the elder or the dependent adult. Really, that's that fear that comes along with, oh, I can't do that because they might hurt me or they might yell at me. So this would include like verbal abuse and things like that. But these are some of the things that we would want to look for. Oh, sorry. All right, I think my slide is missing on that one, so I will just, but I know what it said. So for mental suffering, that you want to look at behaviors such as there could be excessive crying, um, changes in personality. Really, when that fear, you might see when someone walks into the room that you're noticing that their personality completely changes, or they were really talkative and now they're not talking as much. It could include some of these behaviors that we're looking for. We also want to make sure that if there's any type of verbal abuse, that hearing like a loud noise, if they respond in a sort of a very alarming way, that you're like, oh, that seems a little suspicious, or um, you don't that might be an indicator something's happening at home, which makes them fearful when they're hearing that. So we really want to look at different behaviors to really find out if there's mental suffering that's happening. And this can lead to depression and anxiety. It can also lead to PTSD. So some of these traumas in their past could really be affecting them being able to live comfortably and safely in their home. So we really want to not forget that mental suffering is a type of abuse. There's also commonly, when I'm out in the community, people talk about harassment, either harassment by a neighbor or a landlord. Those also would be considered mental suffering. If someone is causing this person distress and unnecessarily, that could be a reason to call APS if they feel they're being threatened and just not safe. That is often something I've heard out in the community before. Okay, then there's physical abuse. I think this is what we think about the most when we just hear the word abuse. So this is, unfortunately, we do respond to many of these cases. And what physical abuse entails is any physical force that results in injury or pain or impairment. This could be striking, hitting, beating, pushing, shoving, shaking, slapping, kicking, punching, burning. It also includes the inappropriate use of medication. So if they're being over medicated, being prescribed, or being given something that's not prescribed to them, or not given something that is prescribed to them, that could indicate. I've heard cases where maybe pain medication was prescribed to the the older adult, and maybe someone else in the family is taking them. So that is also considered physical abuse. And then any type of restraints, such as the bed, a wheelchair, not letting someone be able to move freely would be considered physical abuse. Under physical abuse, there's also sexual abuse, and this is any non-consensual contact of any kind would be considered abuse as well. So things we want to look for. Sometimes when it comes to physical abuse, you are looking for a physical, something physical, either a bruise, a burn, a cut, but there are other things that we want to look for as well. Those are very important, but there might be things you don't see. They could be beneath their clothes, like pressure sores, pressure marks. They might be wearing long sleeve shirts, but they might have wrist markings on their wrist, or you could see a hand, like, or if they were forcefully hit. There could be things that you might not necessarily see. So you want to make sure that you're looking, if you notice any type of blood or any just physical, they seem like it's harder for them to walk or to sit. Those could be some other, or if you just happen to touch their shoulder or their arm and they cringe as if it hurts, that could also be a sign. We also want to look at if there was a history of injuries. Have there been frequent visits to the ER or hospital? This could also indicate that there has been physical abuse happening. And then on here is pregnancy, because we have to consider that we're also talking about people living with disabilities and dependent adults, which that could happen if they potentially are being sexually abused. Next is neglect that we'll talk about. Neglect is when someone is under the care of someone else. So we might see this for more of our people living with dementia, or if they have living with their family, or getting care from a care partner or care partners. So these are the things that we'll see. So when you're in the care of someone else, it is their responsibility to make sure that they have their basic needs, the food, clothing, shelter, medical attention. So those are some of the things that is responsible for the person taking care of them. Or if someone is financially responsible for them, that could also be considered neglect if they're not really doing what they're supposed to, or they could be involved with the the neglect or also financial abuse. Things you want to look for: bed sores is usually a big red flag, because this means they might not be being properly cleaned, turned if necessary, changed appropriately if they are incontinent. These are things that we want to look for, or any other type of injuries, but bed sores are usually a big red flag for neglect. There's also poor hygiene and oral health. Oral health is important too, and can be neglected. So we want to make sure that the person's able to be from head to toe, that they're being properly groomed and cleaned. If this, especially for service providers, or if you're visiting a friend, but you're noticing they're in soiled clothes often, the same clothes, or if you actually see them in their home and they have dirty bed linens or the surroundings, that can be considered neglect. Just lack of water, the basic necessities is also one. Untreated or unexplained injuries. So especially if you notice something before and every time you visit, it seems like they have bruises or some type of injury. This could be also neglect. And you'll notice that some of these types of abuse might overlap, because several things could be happening in the home. We also want to make sure that the caregiver is not, they could not be accepting the limitations. And what that means is maybe the person needs more assistance than the care giver can provide. Or maybe they're just not able to help them if they need help with toileting, or maybe they do need a walker and they're not being provided that. So it's some things that we want to look at in terms of the caregiver as well. And I'll speak a little bit more about that here in a moment. We also want to make sure if the person, especially if they have dementia or a disability and need to be supervised and should not be left alone. This could be neglect if someone's being left throughout the day by themselves, which could host a handful of other risks. So that is considered neglect. And then refusing to get them the medical attention that someone needs would also be considered neglect. The one thing that I want to mention is that some neglect could be unintentional. And since this is about family care partners today, I want to just mention that some neglect can be unintentional. So if a care partner is stressed, overwhelmed, or not able to provide the level of skilled care that the person needs, such as transferring or toileting, any type of personal assistance, these could be types of unintentional neglect. So when APS comes in, they're going to be looking for that as well, and how they can support the care partner. Is it that they need more skills? Do they need education and training? Or is it really beyond their capacity? Like maybe they're not able to physically provide that care. So maybe they will together look at other alternatives. So it's really important that we also consider that some types of neglect could be unintentional. Then there's self-neglect. Again, like I mentioned before, this is not under the Penal Code 368, but it's still very important to talk about. This is probably especially for our service providers. You see this probably most common. And this is where someone's being negligent of their physical, their self, or it could be their home, or it could be financially. We have to always remember that California is a self-determination state. So what that means is that despite what everyone has the right to make their own choices, even if it's not in their best interest, unless they're determined that they do not have that capacity. So we always have to keep that in mind, which could present some challenges for APS when investigating self-neglect. I will also mention that when it comes to self-neglect, if the APS feels like they are, they're resisting, the services, but they're noticing that they're threatening harm to themselves or others, or if they are gravely disabled, that they might be able to get some mental health specialists in, such as PERT. They might be able to call law enforcement. So there are times where they might need to intervene and not accept that they're declining the services. So they are going to be paying attention. If there's something more serious going on, that they're going to be able to get into the house to see what else might be happening. Things you want to look for is it's usually, this is one of the first signs, is they're just poor hygiene, unkept, disheveled, soiled clothes, similar to what I talked about, neglect, wearing the same clothes, dirty clothes. They might physically look dehydrated or malnourished, have sunken eyes or skin discoloration. You might notice that they are not taking their medications or refusing to take their medications. Usually out in the community, their houses are easy to spot. Their home is usually could be unclean, have foul odors. There could be feces. It could be animal feces. Animals could be involved with self-neglect as well. So this, in the previous slide, you saw it looked like a hoarder. Sometimes hoarding can be a sign of self-neglect and that other things are happening. So it's important to report these as well. It also could be that they're using or misusing substances. So that could be another thing. But a common factor for people with self-neglect is they are very independent-minded. They can be very stubborn and resistant to help. But regardless, you should still make sure that you are making that report. These next types I'm going to go through more briefly, as they are not as common, but they're still very important to discuss. One is abandonment. So this happens in a public community space when someone is intentionally left. I do this presentation for senior centers and community centers, and it does happen. People might be just dropped off and then not picked up when they're supposed to be. That would be considered abandonment. The big key factor with abandonment is, does the person who is being abandoned or suspected being abandoned have the capability of dealing with an emergency? Are they able to call 911? Do they have a cell phone? Are they able to ask for help? So if the answer is no, then that is when abandonment would be involved. If the answer, it's things are closing up and they're waiting for their daughter and they have their phone, and that could be considered that the person just might be running late. But especially for people who cannot manage without that and need that assistance is when it's considered abandonment. There's also abduction. So this happens when someone is taken from the state of California and restrained from returning. So So this happens commonly when maybe a family might say, come to Arizona and move with us. We'll make sure you're taken care of. You're going to have family around, so you're never going to be alone. We're just going to take care of everything. And so they come to Arizona, but they realize this isn't really, they are alone. They're not being well taken care of. They don't have control of their money or anything anymore. And really, a lot of times behind it is someone trying to take advantage of them or control their finances. So this is when abduction is considered abuse. And then there's isolation. This is when someone's purposely isolating someone, and this could be restricting phone calls, mail, visits. So I always tell people, if you, especially for service providers, if you're calling someone continuously and you're being told that, oh, they're busy, they're asleep, they're not feeling well today, and this is like multiple times, that could be a red flag. Or if you show up, let's say you're going to go visit a friend, and you're never allowed into the house. They say, oh, they're asleep right now, you can't come. And that's happening over and over again. So these are times that someone could be, it could be isolation or purposely keeping someone in the house. Regardless of someone's disability or if they have dementia, they still have the right to leave their home and to get fresh air. So if there's ever, so that would be considered isolation as well. You also want to look at behaviors. So sometimes you're not going to physically see any of these things. You might not be talking with the person. You might just notice some of these. And we have talked about a few of these, but so we want to look at behaviors as well. Easily frightened is usually a pretty big red flag that something's happening. Preoccupied when the suspected abuser's in the room, so you're noticing a change. They're telling you a story, it doesn't seem real, or you're asking them questions and there's lots of denial. They're very hesitant to talk openly. Sometimes there's possible language barriers, so we have to consider that. Is that a barrier to why they're not able to tell me or ask for help? So those are some things you want to look for. Confusion, lack of responsiveness, contradictory statements are some other ones. This is just a statistic to share to really open up everybody's mind to see how prevalent this can be in our communities, because 64.6% of the suspected abusers are someone that the individual knows. So it could either be a family member, a care provider, spouse, an intimate partner. So that we have to keep that in mind. So if you are from the outside, or the community member or the mandated reporter, that you're like, oh, that would never happen. That's their daughter. They would never do that. Sometimes the suspected abuser are more likely to be someone they know. So we have to just keep that in our back of our brain when we're thinking about abuse. And to see how easy it can be for if the individual loves and trusts someone, that it might be easier for them to be taken advantage of. We also want to look at the suspected abuser and behaviors in them. So sometimes people are encountering both, maybe a spouse or a care partner or another family member. So we want to look at inconsistent explanations. Do they have a history of substance abuse, addictions? Are they dependent on the person? Do they live with them? Do they depend on them emotionally, financially? Are they stonewalling access to them? If you're trying to visit or make those phone calls. And another one is they're always speaking for them, no matter the person's capabilities of being able to communicate, but they're just always speaking for that person. Could be a big red flag. Just a couple more slides. This one is important to talk about too, is we have the Ombudsman program. This is for people who live in a licensed care, long-term care community, And so it's similar to APS, but the difference is that this is really specific for those licensed cared communities. The same rules apply in terms of if you are seeing any types of these other abuses, probably more likely be neglect, but it also could be financial abuse that's happening to the resident, either by a staff member or another resident, that you can make a report directly to the ombudsman program, and they will go out and investigate it. Their main purpose is to advocate and protect the residents' rights, and they every resident, either if it's short-term or long-term in these licensed facilities, have rights, and so their main job is to protect those rights. So lastly, aging and independent services. Like I mentioned before, we have the call center. You can always give us a call if you have a question that's not even APS related, some information, assistance, referral. We're able to provide other programs such as case management, home delivered meals. We also have in-home supportive services, which that's where a lot of our calls come from, is to get support into the home. So again, that phone number, I highly suggest that you all put that in your cell phone number, write that down, 1-800-339-4661. All right, Carrie. We can take some questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That's such a great overview of all of the different information and what to look for. So I know I always learn new things, and it's good reminders as well. So I hope that the audience felt that too. And it's also good to remember that, you know, there are physical things that we might be able to see present, but there are other ways that somebody might be in an abusive situation that you have to look at, you know, the characteristics a little bit more, and you might not actually see something happen. So all good reminders. Thank you so much for that. There are a couple of questions that came in. The first one, the person shared that she has a friend who's concerned about her aging parents. There might be some self-neglect and hazardous conditions in the home. She has called APS and they did a welfare check, but there wasn't any action. What should she do?
Well, most likely what happened is probably the person refused services, especially when it comes to self-neglect, because all APS workers are going to make sure they give them some resources, you know, providing them with some referrals. Even they usually will leave that, even if the person's like, I don't want any services, they're still gonna do their best to provide those and leave that with them. But it makes it harder to do follow-ups when someone is resistant. You can always make multiple. You can always make. You can always call again. You can always make multiple reports, especially if something changes. If you're noticing even a more of a decline physically or cognitively. Also, it could be if there's any suspicion of dementia. Like I mentioned in the report, the family member should mention that in that, because then a trained specialized worker is going to go. So they're going to be a little bit more used to some resistance, some pushback, because most people, especially in the early signs of dementia, are going to be in denial, not think anything is wrong, be very like, I don't need help. So they're going to be a little bit more maybe skilled in that. So those are just some of the initial things that I can think of, is make multiple reports, mention as much details, or if the family member can give any other pointers that would be helpful for the investigator. Put that in, she should mention that when she makes that call.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. Another question, so for somebody who is a social worker, would they call APS or would they call PERT if they have a client with a more immediate emergency?
I'd probably say both. If it's a mental health crisis,
Mhm.
PERT is very specific in what they will respond to. So if they will respond to the immediate response, that is probably the best because th that's what they specifically do is if it's a mental health crisis. But I would also call APS because they're going to provide other different services. It's more like making sure everything in the house is fun. And like I mentioned, if there's like other people in the house, that everyone's being supported. But I think it's also important to remember that APS can make that referral too. But again, PERT is very specific in what they can and cannot do. So APS is probably able to provide other services other than mental health. So I probably do both, but if it's a very immediate, like something crisis right now, I would say PERT or 911
Okay,
and
thank you.
following up with an EPS.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, another question is in regards to APS working closely with law enforcement, do they also assist with restraining orders?
Yes. So
Okay,
APS can help that with that process as well, in making sure to help mediate, facilitate that. So yes, they can be helpful. It's also that's a good reason to call APS too. They can be a little bit more hand holding during that process. And if things need to escalate, if there's court, and sometimes APS can also be an advocate and go with them, take them to court. So yeah, I think that's a good way of getting APS involved if there's a restraining order needed, because they'll work and be that mediator, but also that extra support that maybe the law enforcement cannot provide.
okay, thank you. A couple more questions coming in. So there's one about if we have staff who are receiving incoming calls from the community and neighbors are concerned about an older adult, is it best that that person who has the concern calls APS rather than a staff member from an organization that they're calling in to for the first time?
Yeah, you want to encourage them to call because they'll know best hand and just really reiterate to them that it's confidential, that the
Okay.
person would never know. And if there's multiple neighbors involved that are concerned, there can be multiple reports made that will show that, we received 5 calls about this one person from their neighbors. And because they're going to know a little bit more. So I would really encourage them versus the staff member hearing that and then responding. So really just encourage and advocating that it's okay to call APS, you're
Okay.
safe, you're protected, and you don't even have to disclose, your name.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then one more question regarding a new isolation code. This person sharing the family caregiver is keeping the mother from other family members, and the social worker has made house calls and was referred to the family member's lawyer. Um, the social worker stated not have contact they do not contact lawyers. How do family members get access to the mother? So I think they're just trying to figure out how to move forward with this.
Yeah, that would be a good case to call APS under isolation and having them do a well-being check. Um, and so when the person shows up, if they're not letting APS into the home and they suspect something is going on, then they will call law enforcement to make sure that the well-being check is. So the goal in those instances is making sure the person's okay. Not really to maybe do a thorough investigation, but just making sure is the person there, are they able to, so I would make an APS report for that, and then let them do a well-being check, and just know that they'll call law enforcement if they suspect that, you know, they're not being let in or something serious, more serious is happening.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't see any other questions at this point, so I'm going to just finish up a couple more slides, and then if there is any other questions that that come in, we can answer those before we sign off for the day. But so thank you again, Jonathan, for sharing all of that helpful information. And I know that many of the people on today's webinar are familiar, but this was just a really good reminder about all the different ways that we can be on the lookout to protect older adults in our lives, whether we work with them or volunteer with them or caring for them. So thank you. I wanted to mention we will have an upcoming webinar in January 2024 that will be on the topic of Dementia 101. It will be held in partnership with Alzheimer's San Diego. So that will be a great topic to attend if you're wanting to get to know a little bit more about dementia and those beginning signs and symptoms and how all of that works. So more to come on that. And then I wanted to mention that I participate on behalf of ElderHelp in a organization that's a Caregiver Coalition of San Diego. So there's a lot of different senior service providers and caregiving providers that come together, and we are holding an event tomorrow. So I know it's a little bit of short notice, but wanted to mention it. If anybody will be in the area or wants to come by, you're welcome to. It will be held at the Kathy Hopper Friendship Community Center in Claremont on Bannock Road from 12 to 2. So it's really going to be a great way for people to learn about resources. There's going to be a variety of exhibitors, and ElderHelp will be there. So come and say hello if you do stop by. But that is taking place tomorrow, Friday, November 17th, 12 to 2 p.m. And then I'll just leave it here on ElderHelp's contact information page, just if you have any general questions or inquiries or want to know about resources, you're always welcome to call our main line. You're also welcome to check out our website, elderhelpofsandiego.org. I had mentioned before, we have recorded this webinar, so I will be sending out a link to all of you with the recorded version. If you want to share it with anybody who maybe wasn't able to attend today, we encourage you to do so. And we will also keep the link on our family caregiver page under our webinar library. So you'll be able to access that or refer people to that page on our website if you have anyone that would like to check it out afterwards. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And again, Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing today's topic. I know it's a lot of information, but really useful and good for all of us to be reminded of. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that and sharing all of those different details. So we don't have any other questions, then we will end today's webinar, and we wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and hope everybody stays dry with our recent rain. But thank you so much for joining today, and we'll be in touch soon, and be on the lookout for a follow-up email from me here shortly. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.